that we've developed an attitude, and this is additive to what my buddy here said, that you identify where the constraints are that the conventional wisdom ignores. And like Joe hinted at financing in the market, but there's also the political realm. And we've gotten to the point where we even go after changing the political context in order to make good stuff happen.
You have to.
Yes. And the attitude I'm alluding to is no constraint is a real constraint until it proves to be that. And if it requires changing a code or a law, you go after it. And I think that kind of attitude, aggressive attitude, grows out of experience and gray hair. Plus, it's sort of an attitude about seeing what you can get away with to make the right stuff happen. I think it requires some fortitude, to say the least.
Could you deduce from that answer then that you might have broken a few rules in your career?
Never.
That's good to know.
I think that our willingness to break rules is fundamental to doing what we're talking about. If you accept a rule that gets in the way of the right thing happening, you're giving up the ship before you ever know there's a leak in it.
Incidentally, we're not the only ones who've kind of learned this. I think right now there's a political climate and a market climate in this country to do things better that is the best that it's been since we've been in business. So I think a lot of people, I think a lot of government leaders, people have seen that we can really do better. So things are really teed up now to do some of the things that we've been talking about for a long time.
Yeah, and an important component of that is the emergence of the environmental world, because that group of people has taken on many of the rules that were accepted as this is the way you do it, and said, bullshit, we're not going to accept that. We've had enormous support from a lot of different areas other than just our own profession and company.
There's a pretty powerful underpinning of design workshops, a method of working, and it has in it, I think, embedded in it very strongly the notion that the process has relevance to the outcome. And Joe, you've always spoken about what process means and what the right process is about. Would you articulate what that process is and how universal you believe it has application?
Well, I think process can lead to paralysis. I think process without getting it done can be defeating. So I think it's a fine line between a process that gets it done and a process that just talks about it. And I think that the process issues are very complex now, particularly on a community level. I think management is managing that process is an art form in itself. It's a discipline, and I think Design Workshop has dealt with complexity pretty well. We have had Design Workshop has had people do kind of client surveys to see where Design Workshop's strength is, and I think that being able to manage complexity, at least in our profession, relative to our profession, has been a positive. I think that certainly doesn't come from Don and me. I think it comes from people.
You mean we're not superbly organized? Not superb managers?
Well, I don't think we get up every morning living to manage, okay? But we've had some partners who have business degrees and have brought that to us. So I think the process is one of openness. It's having a clear track about how to work through something. It is to engage people other than ourselves that have information and ideas that we don't understand, and some people quite often that we're very uncomfortable talking to. and then creating time in that so one can take all of that information with people who are very good designers and put it in a physical form. And then there's the technology of how do you actually get that built, and then there's the process of how do you manage it and how is it governed over a long period of time. So it's pretty inclusive.
You know, and Don, your focus has been with a little bit different process, and I will kind of recount an example I can recall, which is an entry to a community in the Park City area. And I think the original design task was simply to create a memorable entrance. And I'm sure that the people you were working for were expecting stone walls and signs that identified the community. And what they got was an entry sign, or an entry sign that was the product of a landscape in which trees were fully integrated into the building. In fact, they had fallen over the building, and you created a sense that there was a complete natural process going on in their entrance. So to those of us who had a discipline about that, we would have expected construction drawings to be completed for a project like that, but it didn't seem to be your process. How did you design that memorable place?
Was that the avalanche that you pulled a tunnel through? You built an avalanche and then had a tunnel drive through it? Mm-hmm. Yeah, explain that to us.
Oh, why do you ask me these kind of hurt? I don't know.
Well,
let me tell you that you have to understand the genesis of that. First of all, the developer was an enormously creative and perceptive man. And that idea of a landslide and trees falling and so forth, much of that was from him. And I played almost as much of a scribe role in that, in articulating visually what his verbiage said. Once he saw the drawings, the initial drawings, then there was a very interesting and very fun process of letting that evolve into what's there today. There was never a set of construction drawings created for that. At some point, a stone sculpture firm was engaged to complete the project. They did what they called construction drawings. We would call them sketches, but it communicated enough to their group of workers to be able to build this thing. And then an on-site guru who was, in my estimation, a genius at making these kind of things happen. So, but I do think that it's an example of that kind of collaboration. I'm not reluctant to have accurate contract documents. I'm just reluctant to execute them myself. You may have noticed that.
Yes, and on behalf of the rest of the firm, we're really glad that you never really had an aversion to construction drawings. I didn't know that till this moment. What is this notion of legacy as it's been defined as the principles of what Design Workshop is standing for today? How did it evolve, and what does it mean? What's the purpose and explanation of having an idea that is the resonating factor of what life at Design Workshop means and the way our work goes together?
Let me just say that by the time you guys developed that model and refined it to the point where it exists today, by the time you started that process, I was retired. So I wasn't going to the partners meetings, which was one of my major objectives in retiring. But I watched and listened to the evolution of that legacy framework. And I have to tell you that it felt so intuitively right to me that I really felt like I had nothing to add to it. It's almost as though somebody articulates your fuzzy thoughts and makes them clear, and you say, yeah, that's what I meant.
That's exactly.
And I think that it reflects in a very simple way what Joe and I have, and you and Kurt and a lot of other people, I think it accurately reflects a rather profound understanding of process and what we're concerned about, but does it in a way that's easily communicable to others.
Well, I think I totally agree with that, and I think that it went through several stages. I think that our first notion about things should be comprehensive and should be beautifully and have a high quality of design should be there. That was never to be compromised. But it should serve a larger purpose, environmental, community purpose, whatever it was. And that was kind of intuitive. And then we all turned our heads down and worked hard until we had that meeting in Santa Fe, that partners meeting, where we said, okay, now we've got this, we've got 30 years of experience. Now, what have we really been doing? What do we stand about? And Todd led us through that discussion, and it led to the 4 rings, to the integration of community, environment, and economics, and art. And it was a couple of days where we really together looked at who everybody else was in our profession and kind of determined who we were and defined what I felt like we'd been doing. Then the next step was to say, all right, are we doing it well enough? And we've paid more attention to some of those circles than we have the other. So the last few years of trying to figure out now how to restructure the firm to do that more rigorously and more specifically has been, I think, kind of tough. I think it started with the legacy book, which forced us to go back and look at all of our projects and see which ones walked the talk and which ones didn't. I have to tell you, I was a little depressed for a while because there was a lot of work that we worked on, but it didn't quite make the grade because of economic conditions, because of whatever. There were a lot of excuses for not achieving your vision. But what came together, I think, is a very clear definition of what in our past work represents those 4 rings. And then the next step has been, okay, how do you restructure the company, and what do you have to do to get people to totally look on environment, economic, community, and art? And I think that they're just words for everything. How do you look at everything and get it from everything into a piece of built work? And fortunately, I have started my retirement, and I haven't had to deal with that issue, and you guys have, and I have to say I'm extraordinarily proud of what the Partners of Design Workshop are doing and the enormous amount of money and investment that you are making in the next phase. And innovators, companies that innovate have difficulties because a lot of times they innovate, become successful, and are so focused on serving their clients that they miss the next innovation, and I don't think that's happening to Design Workshop. And I think our legacy is we started something intuitively that attracted some great people who kind of bought into it and who have dedicated themselves now to taking it to the next step. And I could just kind of die and go to wherever you go, because
the fact that you're retired is the reason why it's in the shape that it is.
I know. There's a message
And the
there.
same thing for me.
Get out of their way.
But I couldn't agree more with Joe, because not only did the company create this conceptual structure, but it has led to the evolution of the administration of the company and the reorganization of the company. So it's not just an idea anymore. It's a report card for how we're doing and a way to really structure our efforts to make sure all that stuff happens. And I'll tell you, I've watched all of this happen from the outside looking in, and I, like Joe, I couldn't be prouder of the fact that it is happening.
It's continuing.
Yeah, it's continuing.
On steroids.
On steroids. And because of the fact that we're gone.
Yeah.
Well, I think you could make a strong case for the fact that you both are not actively practicing a design workshop today is not the barrier to the evolution of the firm, and I'll take serious issue with that. But in the evolution of Design Workshop, there has been new colleagues brought in, there's been new major decisions, there's been geographic expansions, there have been specific directions and business models to pursue with the success and outcome in mind. Tell us a little bit about how your relationship with your partners in the studio has evolved since the beginning when there were 3 of us in the office.
You first.
Well, it was a simple management form because we went to Wienerstube every day, and problems didn't build up because we talked to each other every day. And as it got bigger, it got more complex, and you fell into our laps, and we were planning. Our next step obviously had to be to get into more detailed design and get things built. You brought that to it. Then the 3 of us were sitting around one day, probably out of money at one of the recessions, and said, we need to get somebody in here who has a sense of business. And I called Dr. Reich, who was the head of the landscape architecture department at LSU, and asked him if he knew anybody. And I didn't even get the question out of my ears, in my mouth, and he said, Kurt. So we had Kurt up, and remember, the 3 of us forced Kurt to take the business part. He wanted to come be a designer, and we forced him. We probably should have rethought that a little bit and probably been not quite as aggressive, because then Kurt forced us to change the business structure. And so we went from basically a design firm to developing the business model, which is the organization and financial framework that you have to do what we wanted to do. And if you remember, in one of those partner meetings, we decided that Design Workshop should outlive the founders. The discussion was that there ought to be landscape architecture firms around that had been in a community for 200 years like law firms have, so they're institutions that people trust. And if you remember, once we made that decision, we started changing the kind of people we were searching for, because we were looking for people who could not only do today's task, but people who could take over for us. And then we, I think, got the business thing really well figured out. I think Design Workshop's a very well managed company, and so then turned the attention to, okay, what's next? Now that we have this platform, now we've got the capacity to do a new set of things, and that one was one of the toughest, if you think, and it's still ongoing. So I don't know if that answers your question. And through that process, there were some frictions. There were a lot of things that Kurt did from a business standpoint. I didn't know what in the hell he was talking about. I didn't know what a human resource director was, all right? Quality management. And so, there kind of been ups and downs as we moved things where other people took over and led that emphasis. But it's all been, if you did a straight line, it's been a great line in getting where we want to. But there were some ups and downs in it. Nothing terminal.
Well, that remains to be seen. I don't know how to add to that, Rich. I'm kind of a satellite to all the stuff he just talked about. And I always felt like a fish out of water having those kind of reorganization discussions, but was always in awe of Kurt and Joe's and Becky's ability to conceptualize that sort of thing. I think Kurt was the primary proponent of keeping the administrative structure geared up in a way that allowed us to do the kind of project work that we all thought was important, to which I'm eternally grateful to you guys, because I think absent that, we would not have been able to address the kinds of you know, enormous projects that we've been able to participate in. But my role in those projects has always been on a project basis, not in thinking out in the future how to construct a management structure to accommodate those, but for which I'm enormously grateful.
You- There are a few natural teachers, and I think, Don, you have demonstrated throughout your career that you have the attributes of an excellent teacher. And all of us have been the beneficiary of your patience and your confidence and your willingness to sit down on a one-to-one level and talk about the project and talk about it in terms that allow people to succeed on their own. How does a contribution like that get measured in the future? How do we continue to encourage the mentorship and the teacher in all of us to help others succeed at what we believe is a good thing?
Well, I think the most important component of that is to hire the best and the brightest, and people that have their own initiative. I think another important component of it is a willingness on the part of the partners and the whole leadership of the company to not only allow mistakes, but to even encourage mistakes, because if you're not making mistakes, you're probably not innovating. And I think we've developed as a culture an attitude about a mistake is a good thing if you learn from it. But then the things that have been institutionalized are simply magnificent. DU, Design U, and the willingness for us to take the resources to create an internal educational program that really does facilitate people's interests and desires. And then I think I just implied the fourth thing, and that is to hire aggressive, ambitious, smart people, but then provide them a framework so that they can excel in their own terms. And I think we've always made an effort to try and accommodate people's individual interests and create a context for them to pursue those interests. And there are probably a lot of other things, but those are the ones that are notable in my mind. One of the things that I don't think we've done all that great a job at is building in the capacity in a project context for education to occur. And, you know, and necessarily so, we have to be concerned about project budgets, but education is equally important in the projects in my mind, and I think it's an area that deserves some attention.
Don touched on the notion about the learning experience from the mistake. Joe, if you look back, what would you consider to be one of the greatest mistakes that had an outcome for you that was unexpected and beneficial?
No, I think the process, the design process, is a process of attempting things and making mistakes and learning. I mean, I know we've made some mistakes. I know we've had some large cost overruns. I know we've done some things like that. I really can't point to a memorable mistake. I've just never thought of the process that way. And there are things that we've done where we've started down a track and they worked for us at one size, but then at a certain period of time they didn't work anymore. But I have to tell you, I don't think anything, I think design workshops been very good about learning from every situation. I can't remember a mistake.
Gee, I think it's a mistake to be concerned about making mistakes. And I don't think we've been mistaken in that area. I think mistakes are fundamental. I really do. Oh God, we've all made huge mistakes and will continue to, but I think our advantage is that we don't punish mistakes. We reward them if they lead to something constructive.
I know.
Mistakes are fun.
I'm going to switch to a kind of a look at the future, and particularly where we stand at this point in both the global environmental crisis that's in front of us and the contribution that you believe has to be made by so many people. How do we go about adapting design workshop and the world at large to the possibility of engaging in a sustainable future?
Well, when we were working in Brazil, when the Earth Summit was in Brazil, the United Nations Earth Summit was in Brazil, and we had an opportunity to be there and heard about sustainability at its early phases. And when I heard the term, I thought, bingo, here's an economic term, and it's not an environmental term, it's an economic term that encompasses everything that we've been thinking about, but we haven't been able to put into words. And what's happened is everybody else in the world felt the same way. It's something that people have absorbed, and an economist, Herman Daly, has written, if we would have had to define it then and it was clearly defined, we never would have gotten political support for it. So here is this great opportunity. I think Design Workshop is poised to move forward. I think this is really a better question for the profession of landscape architecture, and I think the profession of landscape architecture has a lot of different parts to it. One of its strengths, one of its weaknesses over the years is there are so many different aspects to it. It's so broad that it's hard to kind of define it. That's a strength and its weakness, because it's hard to define, but its strength is it's not so mired in any one technology that somebody can't, through a process, get to a broader vision. So I think the profession needs to embrace it on absolutely every scale, and I think Design Workshop, as it's doing, just needs to gather information about it and explore opportunities, and then get it from concept to reality, to walk the talk. And there are a lot of people out there talking about this now, and when you really drill down and see who's walking it, there really aren't very many people walking it. It really is the task of getting an idea from kind of a global concept of what the future should be to bricks and mortar. And it's different in every community. Aspen has a set of history. Aspen and Boulder and Denver have a history and some experience in trying to do things that Phoenix and Las Vegas don't, and other parts of the world don't. So there are lessons that can be repeated when other people are ready for it. This is just a totally amorphous thing that touches everything, and the opportunities are unbelievable. It's just doing it, getting it. You know, it's a balance of being able to drill down. This stuff is all highly technical. Everything associated with reducing energy cost, conserving water, it is so highly technical that people have to be able to find an area that they're passionate about and drill down on that and still have a global perspective.
You know, that was really cool.
Thank you, Don.
I'm just sitting here thinking about the breadth of our careers and the fact that it's been almost 50 years. But I'm thinking back to the context we were working in the 50s and 60s. And at that time, and the reason I bring this up is you characterize where we are as a crisis. And I think that there are those at every step in history who consider it a crisis. I don't. I think it's a marvelous opportunity, and I think we're dealing with it responsibly. And I think Joe and I are very fortunate in having grown up through a period of time where there were some really tectonic shifts in our culture. One example is federal highway system, the what's it called?
Interstate system.
Interstate system. But that was justified based on military reasons, but a cynic might describe it as a way to improve the market for automobiles and oil and land speculators. But at any rate, that system allowed the explosion of cities. It had an enormous impact on us at the time, and the whole issue of suburbanization and how to get that under control was responsibly addressed by the Rouse Company, and others, but which we had an opportunity to participate in. Here's a new paradigm generated by an enormous public investment. And what do we do about it? A secondary major cultural shift was in city government, municipal government structure itself, because that explosion of cities generated the understanding that the way cities were organized and financed could not support that kind of growth, and it generated a whole new area of city planning and growth regulation in order to cope with those municipal financial problems as well as other problems. And then simultaneous with that was the emergence of the environmental milieu that was also in response to this explosion. And the information that was generated on the basis of those two things has been an enormous ally to us in Design Workshop in our process of embracing more and more areas and expertise in that process, all leading to something that's much better, that in the absence of that, we'd be in a real crisis. I think the crisis we're in now is really not being able to satisfy the demand for the people that are capable of operating in that arena. But I don't view it as a crisis for us professionally. And it will only be a crisis really globally when we run out of oil or pollute our water to the point where we don't have enough water. It's not there yet. And we have an opportunity, the way things are at this moment, to fix it. And we are fixing it. I mean, it's not just us. There's a whole huge body of people out there that are working on fixing it. Unfortunately, Mr. Bush isn't one of them.
So if I were to ask you, after the view of your careers over the last 50 years, what advice you have to a young landscape architect beginning their career at this point in time, what would you offer as words of advice and wisdom to that beginning point in their career?
Tell them to be a lawyer. No, I'm kidding. No, I think it's the verities, you know. You pay attention, you get a good education, you work hard, you play hard, and you think about how to relate things as opposed to how to take them apart. And then make your life and your work and your concerns seamless, so it's all one thing. It's all of a same color. And I think that's true for anybody in any age, in any situation. I wouldn't have any particular advice to a young professional other than that. And to me, it's sort of duh. That's what you have to do to have a fruitful and gratifying life at anything.
Yeah, I think there are a couple of things. I think that if...
That's why I answered it first, so
Yeah.
you had time to think about it.
Thank you, Don. Depending on the area of landscape architecture, but if somebody wanted to do the kind of thing that we're doing, I think that there are two things that they might think about. One is to find an area of the profession that they had a passion for, because this is a lot of work and it's a hard thing to do if you don't have a passion for it. So regardless of what it is, it'd be good to have an area they have a passion for, and I'd drill down on that one and learn a lot about it. And then I'd recognize that it exists in a context of a lot of other issues, and I think that a person needs to practice that specificity in the context of a vision, and just free themselves of all of the preconceptions and judgment about what's wrong, and let information flow to them, and then spend the rest of their life connecting their focus, their interest, to the rest of the world.
So I knew you'd think of something
It's
cool.
hot and cold. It's focus in general, and I think that if somebody can do that. And then the last thing is a thing that Larry Beidelman told me years ago: always ask, why am I here? And have that clarity about, wait, what am I trying to do today?
Well, in our discussions, it's been very interesting to me to start with the notion of how the firm began, the dreams that you set forth with. And I'm not sure either one of you are aware that yesterday the American Society of Landscape Architects have created an award for design workshop and establishing design workshop as the landscape architectural firm of the year.
Really?
It's about
Really?
time.
Is that right?
That is correct, yes.
Kurt told me last night, called me and told me last night. Sorry. That is really, by the way, that is really cool, and I think it's deserved, and it makes me very proud.
Do you consider that your legacy?
I don't know. You know, I think my legacy, I would be most pleased if my legacy was do great work, make a good living, and have fun. And I think if that stays in place, everything will be fine. And I don't mean that frivolously. I really mean that.
I don't think ASLA can measure my legacy. I think there are things happening with Design Workshop. I think the legacy is starting with some intuitive notions that are being taken forward, and it's beyond what ASLA can measure. They're right, but they don't know why.
Well, and I think another important legacy in my mind is to be willing to tackle stuff you have no idea how to do and just wrestle it to the ground. I mean, somebody has to do it, and it can be fun.
We have never been timid about trying to do things that we know nothing about. And you talked about that earlier on relative to being able to see the opportunity, but also being able to apply the techniques of problem solving to whatever was in front of us. Why has, do you think, a profession not taken on this mantle of being able to try so much more? I mean, for example, there have been periods in the history of the profession in which the responsibilities have been fully shouldered by the profession for the future of the built environment. And then there have been periods that have a declining large view, but tend to be more focused in their purpose and their energies. And yet, looking forward to what the future challenges are, it seems no profession would be as well suited to accomplish some of the tasks that we've been describing today.
I think that we've obviously discussed this a lot of times. I think that the kind of holistic nature of the profession makes it difficult to put a tag on and tie to a soundbite. It's easier for people to aspire to be doctors and architects and lawyers, which are defined things in society, and landscape architecture goes beyond its term. So I don't think that, I think it's easier for people to get attracted to more technical things. than it is the profession. I think consequently the profession's never been able to grow enough, to have enough stature to do that. It's kind of a chicken and egg thing. I think the large firms within the professional landscape architecture are doing the things that we're talking about. There just aren't enough of them to make the kind of impact that the American Medical Association can do, for example. I think it's a scale issue.
Yeah, and a demand issue. I just don't think there are enough of us. And, we're always looking for capable people. And the universities are always behind the curve in delivering those people. I think in general, the quality of landscape architecture education has risen dramatically since
Absolutely.
we were in school.
Absolutely.
But as a profession, we haven't managed to attract enough people into it. So I think it's almost a matter of just we don't have enough of those folks to play the role that potentially we could. I don't know what the answer is to that.
I think the answer is management. I think the management of all of this. Don talked earlier about being a designer in a business world and not feeling like he contribute to the business side. And I felt some of that. Well, I think the nature of this business is to manage people who come together from a wide variety of black backgrounds, and a lot of them aren't managers. Wildlife biologists aren't managers. Transportation consultants aren't managers. I mean, to bring the best of those people together, there is a management activity here to get the best out of talented people in different disciplines, and then at some point in time, designing a solution that reflects all of that. So it really does come down to, you can do all of that and do a financial model and use dollars and spreadsheets. You can do all of that and pass laws and do it in language. Or you can do all of that and create form which requires design. So that design activity is still central to all of that, but the information that needs to be brought to that, and the politics and the public acceptance and the financing have to be managed. And I think that's the next trend is dealing with complexity and putting talented designers, and I think other professions are doing this, by the way, put talented designers in a position where they can give form to it and turn it into places.
Yeah, I'd only add to that again, I reluctantly acknowledge that was clever.
Thank you, Don.
I think we've done a pretty good job in the company of accomplishing that. And I think the corollary to that is mutual respect and acknowledging the worth of those independent areas of focus in being able to orchestrate toward addressing really complex problems. I really admire the capabilities of your generation and the younger people to do that. And, what a wonderful legacy that is.
There's a tension between all these collaborators. There's a tension between all of this. So turning it into a constructive tension instead of a destructive tension is a pretty fine line, and that's the challenge.
Well,
By the way, and I think visualizing things really does help all of those people operate in an environment they've never operated in before. I think that visual tools are missing in economics and law. The visual tools of creating community, I think, are extremely important.
Yeah. Don, you have always been the first to draw an idea, and you've been the first to communicate an idea. Are those skills that are just essential to the success of any set of ideas that you want to portray?
Well, if we're going to be involved, they are.
Well, I think they're complementary. And it's not just those skills. In my mind, what Joe was talking about, management skills are part of that. Marketing skills, accounting skills. I mean, there's a whole array of skills there that require orchestration. And I think Joe's right, it helps to visualize things. Some people don't relate to visual images. They relate to a spreadsheet. But what I'm saying is that the way we've organized the company, and this has much more to do with others than it does with me, is to generate a attitude of respect and acknowledgement of those skills and abilities in the context of creating something bigger than any of us could accomplish by ourselves. And I'm not sure that it isn't a good model for the profession to emulate in addressing these complicated problems and taking advantage of what amounts to, in my mind, an enormous opportunity in addressing those complex problems. I don't see it as a constraint. I see it as an opportunity. And Joe's right. Other professions are doing this as well. It's not, we're not alone in all of this. We're acknowledging the need for it. We're not alone.
Gentlemen, before I start crying, we have 10 minutes.
Okay, well, we have a couple wrap-up questions. And one that comes to mind, Don, about 1990, we decided to go to southern Utah to do the Rainbow Trail, which is on an Indian reservation.
I know where this is headed.
And since you were sitting next to me at the briefing where they described the fact that no alcoholic beverages were allowed on the Indian reservation for obvious reasons, we all agreed, and we actually signed affidavits that we weren't going to be drinking while we were on this trip. And yet, if I recall, the first night that we arrived at the campsite, when your sleeping bag was unfolded and came out of its stuff sack, so did quite a bit of bourbon. Is that true?
Scotch.
Or was that not true?
I think it was Irish.
Was it?
That is, I acknowledge that that's true. But I also want it to be noted that all of you that signed that agreement helped me drink it.
Yeah, he had a full week's supply, and it was gone the first night.
Well, that just shows that the management skill to allow for enough liquor to be there for everyone, was missing.
For only
in that
one
decision.
night.
Was missing.
Well,
But
yes,
it also needs to be acknowledged the integrative capacities I have in making everybody happy.
I say maybe
and
the appetites
cooperative.
generally were misunderstood.
I thought you were going to take that to taking off clothes, but anyway.
Well, there were some incidents. I think they're only rumor. I've never actually seen this to be true or documented in videos and films. But did we have retreats that are memorable as a firm?
Were
Well,
you
the real memorable ones I can't remember.
I can't imagine what you're talking about. We had a lot of retreats that were fairly natural and fairly intoxicated. But it's part of the fun factor. And I have to say that I succeeded as chief in charge of fun.
I think that has been really well acknowledged that you did succeed, particularly in Chama.
I don't remember that one.
I didn't think so.
That's enough, Richard.
Yeah, I think
You can
that's
go
about
home
it.
now.
Was Chama where Kurt got arrested? That's where Greg got the
Greg
ticket.
got ticket there. We got kicked out of the hotel. Chama had a hot tub and a swimming pool.
And it was-
Bailey was the one that we basically created a new forest fire.
Yeah, Bailey caused a few problems because there were some more relaxed people in the firm that really offended some of the more conservative people in the firm with their behavior and dress or lack of.
Now, Bailey was also the venue where there was some paying guests that somehow were at dinner during our awards banquet. And they actually had to leave, and they registered a relatively large complaint.
And called 911.
That's right, and also security was called at what's now called the Glacier Club, which was down near Durango. And I think we were also kicked out by the night security down at the Phoenician. Wasn't that right?
No, I don't think so. I don't know. But there was that DoubleTree
doesn't
Motel.
remember.
Remember that DoubleTree Motel? In Scottsdale?
Yes.
Okay, well, we won't go there. All right. Other than that, I don't, yeah.
Well, you know, that.
If we can't be specific enough about these, more specific, we
So
probably
we
shouldn't
may
tell these
not have
stories.
we may not have succeeded in doing great work, but we succeeded in having fun.
The DoubleTree was also the place where you proposed to all of the partners during a great rainstorm down there that we be involved in a fully integrated business, which included reproduction, blueprinting, travel, courier, and several other businesses that were all the things the rest of us wanted to offload.
I did?
Yeah,
I'm
you
glad
said
we
that the
didn't
way
do
we can make
that.
money is to run our own prints. We can deliver our prints to our clients. We can get a rental company, and we can charge to do that.
God, was I stupid.
So that's the reason you offloaded Porter. Why did you offload me?
Well, Don, if you recall, you
What?
have retired from the firm on at least a half a dozen occasions. And in fact, we've spent more disposable income on retirement parties for you than we have building the education of the firm.
Richard, those weren't retirement parties for me. Those were part of the fun quotient.
So the 300 people that arrived to say goodbye to you were under the misconception that you were retiring?
Isn't that fun?
How did you feel 2 weeks later when you called us and said, I actually don't want to retire, it was just a big ha-ha joke, I want to come back to work?
I thought it was fun.
And that was the plan all along?
I think that you were jettisoned because people were concerned that we were going to get a,
Maternity suit.
yes,
Class action maternity suit.
well, or something. You said that, I didn't say that. I think we ought to end on that.
I think we can end.
About 7 minutes.
Oh,
Okay.
7 minutes.
Oh,
You know-
come on, Mary.
I
This is
lied
good.
the first time, but go ahead and do whatever you want.
Well, we probably need to do the wrap up a little bit, and then we might want to go through that ASLA one since I couldn't possibly have said it in a worse way.
What?
ASLA?
Yeah, I had the awards and design workshop and landscape architect all mixed up. So,
Why don't you, yeah, why don't you do that?
okay, so I don't know if either one of you know about the announcement from the American Society of Landscape Architects yesterday, but Design Workshop has been selected Firm of the Year for 2008. And I wondered if you had any kind of sense that that was ever part of your original vision for what Design Workshop would be.
Yes, it's about time.
Well, Kurt called me and told me about that. I'm exceedingly proud. I really do think it is. I think the firm deserves that, and I'm just delighted about it. It's not anything. When we started, we were just trying to do good work, and I mean, for visionary people, we didn't really have any clue that things would turn out the way that they've turned out, or, you know, it looks like the way they're going to continue.
Tells you something about our visionary capabilities.
Well, it was a long time ago. I mean,
We're supposed to be visionaries.
well, it was out of our experience. It was out of our world to think the way that we're thinking now at that point in time.
I'm getting tired and can't help being humorous about all this, but I am genuinely grateful for the organization that's emerged out of Joe and I's sort of meager beginnings. And if there's a legacy, it doesn't really have anything to do with the size of the company but it has everything to do with the quality of the people that
And
are
the
in it.
values.
I'm not sure that we could even get a job at Design Workshop if we were getting out of school right now. And it, to me, is immensely gratifying to be surrounded with the quality of people that are in the office now. And I'll tell you, I learn as much now from these young people as I did when I was in college from my professors. They're a remarkable group of people, and I'm proud to be a part of it, or an ex-part of it.
Joe and Don, it's been a pleasure to have you here. It's been very valuable to hear about how it started, what you've done, and the accomplishments are really unparalleled in the profession. And want to appreciate you sharing with us these times and thoughts as they relate to how the profession has been enriched by your contributions. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Richard, I'd like to thank you for sitting there with a straight face and hearing all these stories that you've heard about 200 times and asking them like you didn't know the answer.
Well, some of the questions Don has heard for the very first time.
That's because the other times I heard them, I wasn't sober.
Here's your paper.
Gentlemen, great.
Thank you, Mary.
All right. That was excellent.
It's an international symbol for fun.
Yeah.
Joe, bring mine, would you?
Yeah.
So interesting. That was really good.
I'll trade you.